Men are not more logical than women, they simply lack empathy.
Even with all this data supporting women's intelligence, it still stands that women's intelligence today is still overlooked and downplayed. Like, oh, it's intuition, it's not intelligence. Like, men are more logical, women are so emotional. Meanwhile, men do the most irrational things ever out of ego, out of stress, out of not perceiving the whole situation. Okay? Men are the heads of household, meanwhile not knowing how to run one. Like, give me a break. Okay, I already woke you up. So it's now your job to wake other women up. It's not women's intuition, it's intelligence. Hey bestie, welcome to the Spoiled Girly Support Group podcast where we talk about how to get that bag while also securing your own bag. I'm your host Elle, and let's get into it. On today's episode, we are talking about how it's not women's intuition, it's intelligence. Like, let me say that again. It's not women's intuition, it's intelligence. And how making that mental recategorization of calling women's intuition actual intelligence will help you and the women around you gain the audacity to share your thoughts and advocate for yourself and other women. We have a lot to cover, but before we get into it, I need you to hit the like, subscribe, and the notification bell so you never miss a Spoiled Girly episode. With that being said, let's get into it. Today's class is heavily informed by the book How to Think Like a Woman by Regan Penaluna. And the premise of this book is that philosophy has long been gatekept from women by men, namely privileged men. Penaluna writes, philosophers have been some of the most consistent and fruitful contributors to theories of women's inferiority, treating topics traditionally studied by women, such as parenting, caregiving, and other aspects of domestic life, with little interest, while the white male point of view is dramatized in countless thought experiments. And this may all sound like it's not really a big problem. Like, why are we even talking about this in the Spoiled Girly support group? Like, I don't have any plans to go into philosophy. Like, this is brain rot. Go touch grass. But first of all, philosophy is for everyone. It's not just old men putting on robes, grabbing their Moleskine books, and sitting on a cliff to contemplate whether man is truly free. No, like, philosophy is being able to think for yourself about your reality, your existence, the meaning of your life. So this issue of philosophy being gatekept from women actually runs much deeper than you think. Whether you believe it or not, the historical treatment of women venturing into philosophy, into higher learning, does affect us regular women in the everyday. From how we verbalize our desires, needs, and opinions to how intelligent we think we are, or other women are. Questions like, are women even worth listening to? Or are we worthy of having a public voice? Should we even have the right to vote? Or make choices that impact our lives, our families, our society? All of these are a reflection of how important society deems women's thoughts and opinions are. As Penaluna writes, they don't acknowledge that their skepticism of women's intellectual capacity, expressed casually and with an objective air, impacts the self-perception and lives of actual women, with they being the men who belittle women in philosophy. And we've talked about this countless times in the Spoiled Girly support group. Like, we don't need to teach women how to be confident because women are born confident. Like, we have so much to be confident about. But what we do need to teach women is how to handle the consequences of their confidence. And I've gotten some pushback on that too, like, oh,
what about XYZ circumstance where this advice doesn't apply?
like, okay, then it's not about that then. Okay, like, what about this? What about that? Then it's not about that. Okay, like, I swear, like, the no nuance Nellies are the bane of our existence because instead of us being able to talk about certain topics, they insert their no nuance nonsense into a conversation. And honestly, I know they get it because women are so intelligent, but they're just being obtuse for the sole purpose of being obtuse. And here's something too that has been grinding on my gears recently is that whenever no nuance Nellies insert themselves into conversations in the Spoiled Girly support group, like, they're being agents of the patriarchy as well, because they are derailing us from having very important conversations so that we don't get to have these conversations. Because they try to keep us occupied with their no nuance nonsense so we never get anything done. If we can't be occupied with children and endless housework, they'll occupy us with no nuance nonsense. Like, we're no longer falling for that, okay? No nuance Nelly, sit in the front. So annoying. And that's also why we don't argue with non-spoiled girlies in the comments, because they're literally trying unsuccessfully to occupy our time and our energies by engaging us in pointless arguments, so we never get to the next level of realizations, of actualizations. Like, so annoying. So I know the urge to argue online can be strong, especially when people are being obtuse for no reason, no nuance nellies for no reason, but please do not engage. Any and all attention from you, even negative attention, is good attention for these people. Okay, no thank you. Back to the topic, I wanted to share this book with you because if I didn't love being a woman before, I love being a woman so much more now after reading this book. I no longer feel like I'm overthinking or I'm reading too much into things or whatever I want to think about or talk about are pointless topics, that it's not that deep when it really is that deep. And I just felt so validated after reading this book. So after today's class, I hope you read it too. And also, even the author talks about how writing this book made her feel like it's possible to be a woman and be free. Penaluna writes, "This book is about how I came to feel trapped by the concept of woman and how I've been grappling ever since with whether it's possible to be a woman and be free." So with that said, let's get into a lot of the issues the book covers and how it can set you free from said issues. First is women and imposter syndrome. According to Penaluna, women are more likely than men, especially in their formative years, to feel like imposters. And before we dive deeper into that, I wanted to first define imposter syndrome just so we all have the same starting point. According to the NIH, the National Institute of Health, imposter syndrome is a behavioral health phenomenon described as self-doubt of intellect, skills, or accomplishments among high-achieving individuals. And this can look like you getting a promotion at work or landing this shiny new job and not feeling qualified, even though your resume says otherwise. And imposter syndrome can also show up in our relationships. If you constantly feel like you're not good enough for your partner when they've done or said nothing to make you feel that way, that could also be a case of imposter syndrome. And while this can technically affect anyone, imposter syndrome is often associated with high achieving women who are in male dominated industries. And unfortunately, there are numbers backing that up. For instance, a 2014 internal study by multinational information technology company Hewlett Packard found that while men apply to jobs even when they meet only about 60% of the qualifications, women applied only if they met 100% of them. I really want to know where men get the audacity because I want some. Okay, in a 2020 poll of 750 high-performing executive women just below C-level in different industries, it revealed that 75% have experienced imposter syndrome at some point in their careers. This is because in a patriarchal society like ours, women have to face more obstacles, biases, and societal expectations and discrimination. Taylor Swift said so herself. "I'm so sick of running as fast as I can, wondering if I'd get there quicker if I was a man." And Taylor Swift, if you've been living under a rock, is literally the first billionaire in history to have music as her main source of income. And she's still questioning whether or not she would have become successful faster if she was a man. And what's even trickier is now that society is slowly becoming more progressive, all of these old and new expectations on women have transformed into double-edged swords.
Oh, don't worry, society expects plenty from women. We're expected to age gracefully but never let ourselves go, work like we have no children, and parent like we have no job. They'll call the stay-at-home mother unfulfilled, but the working mother selfish, all while childless women are considered incomplete. Go chase that career, but never at the expense of a family. Think like a man if you want to be successful, but don't act like one if you want to be liked. We're supposed to mother our husbands, but never treat them like children, and put out on demand, but demand respect. Married and miserable is better than single and happy. Don't stay with an abusive man, but never break up your family. Don't marry a bum for love, but don't stay with a successful man for security. Don't be dependent on a man for money, but don't emasculate them by earning more. They'll tell us to embrace our sexuality, but have some self-respect, and to care about our appearance, but stop looking for attention. Just say no, but let him down easy. Be aware of your surroundings, but stop being so dramatic. Practice self-love, but don't love yourself too much. Dream big, but stay small, and would you like me to keep going?
Why did that have to hit so hard? And these same sentiments are echoed in America Ferrera's famous monologue in the Barbie movie. Insert "what was I made for" background music. Just imagine it, okay? It is literally impossible to be a woman. You are so beautiful and so smart, and it kills me that you don't think you're good enough. Like, we have to always be extraordinary, but somehow we're always doing it wrong. You have to be thin, but not too thin, and you can never say you want to be thin. You have to say you want to be healthy, but also you have to be thin. You have to have money, but you can't ask for money because that's crass. You have to be a boss, but you can't be mean. You have to lead, but you can't quash other people's ideas. You're supposed to love being a mother, but don't talk about your kids all the damn time. You have to be a career woman, but also always be looking out for other people. You have to answer for men's bad behavior, which is insane. But if you point that out, you're accused of complaining. You're supposed to stay pretty for men, but not so pretty that you tempt them too much, or that you threaten other women because you're supposed to be a part of the sisterhood. But always stand out, and always be grateful. But never forget that the system is rigged. So find a way to acknowledge that, but also always be grateful. You have to never get old, never be rude, never show off, never be selfish, never fall down, never fail, never show fear, never get out of line. It's too hard, it's too contradictory, and nobody gives you a medal or says thank you. And it turns out, in fact, that not only are you doing everything wrong, but also everything is your fault. I'm just so tired of watching myself and every single other woman tie herself into knots so that people will like us. And if all of that is also true for a doll just representing women, then I don't even know. There are so many things that women are expected to do and be, and it's suffocating because it just leaves us never feeling enough no matter which path we choose. I mean, how are we ever meant to feel secure in ourselves when we're expected to be walking contradictions all the time? And more importantly, what sense of real identity can you build when everything is meant to feel right and wrong at the same time? So make it make sense. So what do? Okay, what do we do in society makes us feel like there's always more and more and more to learn? We do the opposite. We unlearn. We undo the conditioning that we're inferior because we're women, that our ideas and opinions don't matter because they're informed by our womanhood. Penaluna writes, "For centuries, men have told us women how to think or how they ought to think, and it's typically in a way that is inferior to their way of thinking and serves their purposes. I don't believe that there is one way to think like a woman, just as I don't believe there is a single way to be a woman. A few things are common to all of us. Patriarchy makes it hard for a woman to think for herself, to voice her own thoughts, and for the most part, philosophy hasn't done us any favors. As women, it's not solely on us to demand society spaces to be more inclusive, but if we ourselves stay stuck in this harmful thinking that we don't deserve to be here or that we don't deserve to be heard, these spaces will never feel welcoming." Now, let's get into another issue, and this issue is how women's occupation is to be occupied by her husband and children. Penaluna asserts that a barrier to women's engagement in philosophy is a rather obvious byproduct of patriarchy, which is that women have been kept from engaging in creative passions or philosophy by default because we carry the burden of housework and childcare. In other words, a woman's occupation is to be occupied by her husband and children. As Penaluna puts it, philosophy was an expensive activity. To have the leisure to get lost in abstractions and ponder the nature of the universe, a philosopher could not spend his days worrying about dinner, laundry, or the incessant demands of a young child. Where did his freedom come from? You need good luck, said one ancient philosopher, and not to have been born a woman, said another, or a slave. And one could make the argument that women are still experiencing some form of domestic captivity today in the form of the mental load. Mental load is a term used to describe the invisible labor involved in managing a household and family. And it is the labor that typically falls on women's shoulders, even in the most progressive of families. It is also referred to as cognitive labor. And the mental load isn't about the physical tasks that need to be done for the family or around the house, but rather the overseeing of those tasks. It's about being the one who's in charge of making mental running lists of everything that needs to be done and when those tasks need to be done and who those tasks need to be delegated to. And a study published in the American Sociological Review describes it as the responsibility of anticipating needs, identifying options for filling them, making decisions, and monitoring progress. A recent report from the children's nonprofit Bright Horizons paints a pretty accurate picture of this. A child's school day isn't just about the physical jobs of pickup and drop-off. It's also about the perpetual mental awareness of schedules, including early release days, carpools, doctor's appointments, playdates, special events, field trips, class parties, science fairs, who needs to bring what and which day requires special supplies. And those are only some of the items on the family list that require a working mother's constant mental presence. The mind share versus time share equation is at the heart of the mental load. the requirement on women to be not just parents and caretakers, but also unofficial keepers of where the entire family needs to be and when, and perpetual guardians against anything falling through the cracks. And if that sounds exhausting, it's because it is. Lucia Cicciola, PhD, a psychologist at Oklahoma State University, has researched the impacts of this invisible labor on mothers and found that the mental load is linked to strains on their well-being and lower relationship satisfaction. And through her research, she found that nearly 9 in 10 mothers in committed relationships say that they feel solely responsible for organizing family schedules, the burden of which leaves them feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, and unable to make space for their own self-care. And if you think that this isn't that pervasive, just think about some of the female characters you see in TV shows, particularly the moms. And as much as a lot of people like to romanticize Phil Dunphy, his dynamic with Claire in Modern Family, the TV show, especially in the earlier seasons, it clearly depicts how husbands tend to over-rely on their wives to make sure that everything and everyone is in line. And in one conversation Claire has with Gloria, Claire compares the two of them and says that while Gloria lives with 2 adults, her husband Jay and their very mature son Manny, she has 4 children, her 3 actual children, and Phil, her husband. And I know that some people are probably thinking that the solution to this mental load problem is easy. Just communicate. Just share with your partner. Just ask your husband. It's because you're not asking for help. But that mindset still reinforces that it's women's job to ask for help. Okay? Like when we tell women that it's still their responsibility to remind their husbands to pull their weight at home, we're telling them that it is their sole responsibility to know how to run the household. That when it comes to child rearing, chores, and everything concerning the family, men and women aren't really partners. Like, men are supposed to be heads of household, but plenty of them don't even know how to run one.
When it comes to the mental load, one of the biggest complaints that women have typically is that their partner will say, just tell me what to do. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. And that in itself is obviously a mental load, but not only is it a mental load, it's very frustrating because oftentimes they have said what they need or what to do. They've said, hey, it'd be really helpful if every day you emptied the dishwasher or if you could get the kids ready. And then what happens is the partner either forgets, doesn't know how to do it, continues to ask how to do it, or requires their partner to tell them every single time. So they can't just tell them one time, they have to tell them every time. And so when you say, just tell me what to do, it doesn't actually feel like you are participating. It's as if you are asking your partner to instruct you and guide you the whole way. And this is what women are typically asking of their male partners in these heteronormative relationships. We are asking that when we do tell you something, when we hand you it on a platter and say, this is what it is, this is what we need from you, that you take that, you listen to it, and you actually do it, and that you remember it, and don't have to continue asking and requiring us to expend our mental energy for you to do that task.
And one thing I want to know about the conversation about, oh, do you know how to change the oil? You know how to do this? Like, do you know how to mow the lawn? Do you know how to fix something when it breaks? Like, okay, these are things that happen. Mowing the lawn, let's say, once a week max. A lot of people mow their lawns every other week too. So once a week max, when the tasks that women are expected to do every single day, they're repeatedly getting done every single day, sometimes twice a day. So whenever people say that like, oh, well, you don't do the oil change, you don't do these random once in a blue moon type of stuff, that's a false equivalence. Like, that's not the same thing. And what's worse is that women are noting a difference between their husband's competence at work versus at home.
My biggest complaint is somehow at work he knows how to anticipate, prioritize, and organize, but somehow when he enters our house, it's all gone. Someone else said, but his boss can ask him to do something once and it's done, no questions asked, and perfectly.
And the thing is, unless you divorce your husband and commit to being a single girly for the rest of your days, your children growing up and leaving the nest won't eradicate this problem. As long as these women share a home with their husbands, with their boyfriends, with men, they'll be expected to keep a mental tab of all the chores that need to be done or assigned and all the things around the house that need to be fixed, all the appointments that need to be booked and gone to. Because we still aren't freeing women from the traditional roles of caregiver and caretaker. And even if they're always using their mental energies to fulfill these roles, there's just not going to be much left for philosophy and higher learning. In short, women's job, women's occupation has always been to be occupied by men and children. Unless you explicitly design your life for it to not be that way. Unless you actively find a partner who allows you the space and time to think for yourself. Like, you don't need to join a university or get a master's or a PhD in something. You just need time to think. Like, you need time to clear your mind. Like, you need the time and space to philosophize. So that's the issue of women being occupied by men and children. Now let's move on to the beauty myth, because another issue that keeps women from philosophizing, from thinking for themselves, is this concept that for you to be heard, you need to be beautiful. And this gets us into Naomi Wolf's book, The Beauty Myth. The beauty myth is designed to make women feel ugly and inadequate regardless of their actual appearance. And it argues that the issue isn't actually with beauty practices themselves, but with the fact that women often feel compelled to engage in them to feel worthy or accepted. And if you don't think that beauty has nothing to do with philosophy or intellectual discourse being gatekept from women, especially today, just think about how there still exists a false dichotomy between the pretty girl and the smart girl, the beauty versus the brains. Wolf writes, "In order for women to learn to fear one another, we had to be convinced that our sisters possessed some kind of mysterious, potent, secret weapon to be used against us, the imaginary weapon being beauty." And you see it all the time in pop culture, women being pitted against each other, conditioned to see each other as threats. Katie Heron versus Regina George, Alex Dunphy versus Haley Dunphy, blonde Taylor Swift and brunette Taylor Swift in the You Belong With Me music video. Because who better to make smart girls feel inadequate than the girl who catches the boys' attentions? Okay? And I also have beef with this beauty myth when it comes to women's intelligence, because one of the things that really grinds my gears is whenever I see female content creators and then they say something, and the people disagreeing with them, instead of attacking their ideas or the validity of their claims, they always attack their appearance. It's almost like you can't have an opinion because you're ugly. And so on top of making sure that you have good content, female content creators also need to make sure that they look good while they deliver the good content, because your appearance plus your content, they're inseparable. The beauty myth is definitely one of those things that we need to get over in the future because it's getting in the way, okay? So now that we've talked about all those topics, let's move on to privilege and philosophy. So between the mental load and the beauty myth, it becomes even clearer that society today is still designed to keep women from engaging in philosophy, from thinking for themselves, from coming up with these realizations and actualizations and sharing them with other women. So because if you're meant to focus on your husband and children, if you're meant to carry the mental burden of keeping your entire family in line, if you're meant to obsess over how you look, then how are you ever going to achieve self-actualization? And this brings me to Penaluna's next point, which is that philosophy, especially for women, is a hallmark of privilege. In the article titled Art and Wealth in the Atlantic, O.B. Frothingham wrote about the relationship between art and wealth. "There has been no great art in ages of poverty. No age of wealth has been without it. The supreme accomplishments of the artist have glorified prosperous times. Witness the opulence of Pericles, which was the culminating point of Athenian opulence. The energy of the ruler, conspiring with the popular feeling of abundance, raised the Parthenon and erected those works, the loveliness and the grandeur of which astonished the world." Historically, great is a product of wealthy and prosperous times, because it was during these periods that people had more resources such as time, energy, and money to pursue artistic endeavors. And the same has been true for philosophy, where only women of privilege could engage in the practice. To illustrate, let's talk about Mary Astell. Born in 1666 in England, Mary Astell argued that women should be educated so that they could pursue personal happiness and contribute to society. However, Mary herself had to face the harsh reality of her times. Without a dowry, she would have had to marry beneath her and have even less time and resources to prioritize her intellectual growth because she'd be stuck doing endless chores. But that didn't stop her, though. So, being quite the trailblazer of feminism, Mary argued that, like men, women had reason and intellect. She believed that God gave women these abilities for a reason and that women must put them to good use. But unfortunately, in the society she lived in at the time, women, especially those who belonged in the upper classes, they were expected to be anonymous and humble. And during these times, humility for women was seen as a virtue. And because of that, even privileged women had to balance meeting these expectations while still trying to engage in philosophical discourse. And if you thought that women who had successfully nurtured their intellectual growth had been revered, think again. Okay, no one likes an intelligent woman. According to another female philosopher, Damaris Cudworth, or Lady Masham, a smart woman is intimidating, and for this she is mocked and gossiped about all over town. Her local parson is too shy to speak with her. Her doctor worries that she is concerningly peculiar. Because she is intelligent enough to manage her own home, she makes her neighbors uncomfortable and they rarely visit. Masham says the smart woman is at odds with society whether she wants to be or not. Her very being is a threat to the world as such. But despite Lady Masham's observations of how smart women were treated in society, Astle still believed that a happy life was one that was tied to intellectual pursuits. And much like Naomi Wolf, Astle was critical of the idea that a woman's worth was tied to her physical appearance, stating to imagine that our souls were given us only for the service of our bodies, and that the best improvement we can make of these is to attract the eyes of men. We value them too much and ourselves too little if we place any part of our worth in their opinion. Period. Okay, say it again. Like when you're prioritizing beauty for the male gaze, you value these men too much and yourself too little. All in all, Astle was horrified by how society normalized women's thoughtlessness, how women have been conditioned to prioritize pleasing men instead of nurturing their own intellectual growth. Because for her, women's minds were actually better suited to grasp the truth than man's. That's because a woman's intellectual sensibility is informed by both reason and love. Our opinions and ideas could actually be more superior. Penaluna writes of Astle's argument, love plays a critical role in knowledge because it draws us toward objects. By contrast, the intellectual temperament of men falls short of this ideal. Whether by nature or nurture, Astle isn't decided, men are far more prone to selfishness and so capable of producing only distorted truths. And unfortunately, for the women haters today, this bold claim by Astle is beginning to hold water, especially in the discussion of women's suitability as leaders. In a study conducted by Dr. Alice Eagley, a scholar on the topic of women's leadership, she had found that women make better leaders because women tend to be more transformational leaders. That compared to their male counterparts, women leaders were more found to seek to develop others and listen more effectively, in addition to generally thinking more outside the box. And various reports, including the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report, also state that the top skills needed to be successful leaders of tomorrow are emotional intelligence, empathy, listening skills, coaching and mentoring, and innovation and creativity. Not only that, but research has also revealed that women tend to be better at using these soft skills than men. And if you're not convinced, let science make the case for women even more. A study by the University of Southern California found that under high-stress situations, men tend to behave riskier than women, often causing negative impacts and costly outcomes. That is because men and women respond to the rise of cortisol differently, with research showing that a woman's brain can manage cortisol levels more effectively, allowing her to respond with more grace under pressure. So maybe instead of commending a woman for responding elegantly to a highly stressful situation and pinning it all on her women's intuition, let's call it for what it is: intelligence. Specifically, the emotional intelligence that is a result of her physiology and life experiences. We're talking nature and nurture. And this acknowledgement that women aren't actually less than men shouldn't even stop in the workplace, okay? In our relationships, we should also work on dispelling the idea that men are the logical ones, okay? Like, men are not more logical. They just have less empathy.
Men are not more logical than women, they simply lack empathy. In the aspect of, if a man and a woman is arguing, and the woman is giving the man points on why she's feeling a certain way, and the man is giving the woman logic on why she shouldn't be feeling a certain way, and he is not understanding why she is feeling that certain way, that doesn't mean that he is more logical and she's being more emotional. That simply just means that he is lacking empathy. Okay, so there are two types of empathy, right? There is cognitive empathy and there is emotional empathy. Now, cognitive empathy is when you fundamentally understand why a person is feeling a certain way. For example, if someone's daughter died, you can logically understand why they are feeling a certain way, right? or if you get slapped in the face and that person gets mad, you can understand why they feeling that way, right? That's logical, right? So if your man isn't fundamentally understanding why you are feeling a certain way, that doesn't mean he's more logical. It's the opposite. That means he isn't being logical enough. Now, emotional empathy is when you are empathizing with a person because you are feeling the exact same way. For example, if someone died in a TV show, a character died, and all the other characters are crying and you start crying too, you are empathizing with them because you are feeling the exact same emotion that they are feeling, which is grief, which is loss. Because you are feeling the same way, you understand why they are feeling the same way. So the next time your man say you are being illogical and emotional, tell him no, you are being illogical because you cannot logically understand why I am feeling a certain emotion. Remember, emotion and logic, two different things, right? Also, empathy and logic. Empathy is not an emotion. Empathy is the understanding of emotion. Always remember that.
I love that. Empathy is understanding of emotions. So if you don't have empathy, you don't have understanding, you're not being logical. Let's get into the comments.
It's always you're too emotional and can't think logically. Never I lack the emotional intelligence to empathize with you. Emotion and logic are not opposites. Emotions are quite logical once you understand them. Ignoring them is illogical.
So before you accept that you're just not logical enough, you're too emotional whenever you bring up perfectly valid issues, I want you to question whether logic and emotional intelligence actually are mutually exclusive. You have to have emotional intelligence to make logical decisions. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. And unfortunately, even with all this data supporting women's intelligence, it still stands that women's intelligence today is still overlooked and downplayed. Like, oh, it's intuition. It's not intelligence. Like, men are more logical. Women are so emotional. Meanwhile, men do the most irrational things ever out of ego, out of stress, out of not perceiving the whole situation. Okay? Men are the heads of household, meanwhile not knowing how to run one. Like, give me a break. Okay, this is not what we would expect from the born leaders. So that all sounds pretty bad, okay? So there has to be a light at the end of the tunnel. And now that we're aware of all the things that are keeping women from philosophizing, from thinking for themselves, from spreading all their knowledge with other women, we can now ask, what do we do now? Well, aside from what I mentioned earlier about unlearning the idea that we're inferior because we're women, there's a couple things that we can practice until they become second nature. And today I'm going to be sharing those with you from Penaluna's book. The first would be to stand your ground in the decisions that you make for yourself. It's going to be really challenging to go against what society expects of you. So you need to stand your ground. Penaluna says so herself. It's often a tougher path for a woman because society can be a hostile place for her to cultivate her subjectivity. It was true in the 17th century, and it was true for me. Maybe then the common experience of being a woman in philosophy is to be effaced. Your feelings, your opinions, your presence, your life, your works, your impact are belittled, glanced at, or ignored. I took Masham's recommendation. Do not retreat. A woman's path to self-knowledge requires her to risk losing herself to find herself. And unfortunately, us women have been so boxed in by society that even stretching your arms to try and expand the box, even just a little bit, feels so wrong. You have all these purists telling you that you're not this enough, you're not that enough if you attach yourself to a certain term. The thing is, we can't keep ourselves trapped in spaces we know we've outgrown just because we're not sure of what's waiting for us elsewhere. We're never going to discover the kinds of new ideas and opinions that we can have if we're not going to be brave enough to live the experiences that will birth them in the first place. And the second solution is to uplift your community. According to Penaluna, to be a self is to be profoundly connected to others, and to be free is to aid in the freedom of others. Perhaps this is all there is to rapture, to free each other to hear our own voices. And author Toni Morrison also has a similar quote where she says, if you are free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. And I think misogyny has been so ingrained in a lot of us that it manifests in ways that we don't even realize. Sometimes women are the ones who silence other women in spaces where we already have to fight so hard for our voice to be heard. That's why I am so perfectly fine with the term spoiled girly. I actually love the term. I think it's all encompassing. I love it. Spoiled girlies in the spoiled girly support group, we are too radical for some people and we're too regressive for other people. And God forbid we call ourselves whatever other label. People will say we're not this enough, we're not that enough, you're being a bad this term. And once again, it's derailing us from actually philosophizing. Like, I'm so tired of the purists. I'm so tired of the no nuance nonsense. Like, let's get things done and undone. Okay? Case in point, this whole notion that women are somehow less intelligent. So I think now that we're more mindful of how society is designed to strip women of the time, space, and resources. So I think now that we're more mindful of how society is designed to strip women of the time, space, and resources to think and spread their knowledge, then maybe now we can be more proactive in helping other women reclaim that power. Okay, I already woke you up. So it's now your job to wake other women up. Okay? Astle pointed out that men have always had these thriving communities that empowered them and that women deserve to have the same. And luckily for us, social media is giving us even more opportunities to show our solidarity with other women. Case in point, the Spoiled Girly support group. I feel so blessed to be part of the Spoiled Girly support group, where the Spoiled Girlies can come in and be supported and support each other. And it is so important for us to be having these conversations and facilitate discourse about matters that we find interesting and important and 100% affect us. So I really am so happy that you're here and that you show up every single time. Okay? I love this for us. Now, back to the topic. I deeply, deeply resonate with Penaluna's quote where she says, "I have a hope for the world of ideas that its stewards will continue to be more open to the ways ideas function and the profound impact they can have on the lives and minds of others." And to be honest, with the increasing awareness of our generation, I'm actually full of hope that the issues that we talked about today are slowly being addressed. And finally, the third solution that I want to share with you that you can start today, like right now, is to take ownership of your capacity to philosophize. You're doing it right now. You thinking is philosophizing. You watching this video and indulging your curiosity, you are engaging in a form of philosophy. And you also do it in other situations whenever you're sharing your ideas or assumptions or opinions. That's not just you spilling the tea with your girlfriends. That's philosophizing. When you're typing comments on someone's video, you're philosophizing. When you're creating and recreating scenarios in your head, you're philosophizing. When you're asking yourself, why would he do that? You're philosophizing. When you're gossiping, when you're just vibing with your girlfriends, you're philosophizing. You are adding to the collective knowledge of society. Your thoughts, your ideas, your voice is so important. So you need the time, space, and resources to engage with them. And you need to claim your intelligence. Okay? Because it's not women's intuition, it's intelligence. So what does our future look like? Masham initially believed that it would take an apocalypse to make men and women equal. But then she came to see that women can free themselves from these outdated expectations through the power of reason. Because for her, the fundamental problem wasn't that women before were prevented from studying the same subjects as men, but that women's minds weren't free because society made rational women feel unattractive and worthless. But believe it or not, the problem also shows our way forward. Masham recommended a two-tiered reformation. The first involves the individual, so this looks like women cultivating their own autonomy of thought. And the second involves society, so this looks like providing girls with a rigorous education. But I would add a third, okay? Earlier, we talked about owning your decisions and your philosophizing, unlearning self-limiting beliefs that women are inferior, and uplifting your community. But you will not have the strength to do any of these if you don't do this. If you don't recognize your intelligence as an asset. And also, be prepared for the consequences of your audacity because audacious women are not treated well in society. Think of all the confident and audacious women that you see and hear every day. They have to put up with so much hate because society hates audacious, confident, intelligent women who dare to think that they are worthy of being seen and heard. Okay? When you stop defining yourself by the expectations that people have on you, when you stop living your life by the rules that other people set, when you stop accepting that you're somehow lesser than, when you finally reclaim your power and your voice, when you begin to trust yourself, I'm telling you, these people will work even harder to make you second guess your ability to think and decide for yourself and your ability to spread your knowledge with other women. But remember that none of what they do or say about you is about you, okay? That's not a reflection of you. It's a reflection of them. Everything is projection. It's not your fault that they can't perceive the truth that you deliver. It's not your fault that they don't have the emotional intelligence to process the emotions that you pick up and process from others. It's not your fault that they are slow to put the pieces of the puzzle together. It's not your fault that they're not good at recognizing patterns. It's not your fault that they're not as intelligent as you are. They never had to be until now. Bestie, wake up.